Hello, my name is Rhonda McKenzie. I'm the Year 12 Coordinator and Head of Jackson House, and my presentation today will be on girls and adolescence. So, as it states here on the screen, parenting is tough, and there are so many factors that need to be dealt with. So obviously they're coping with significant physical changes and emotional changes and hormonal changes. They're trying to find their place in the world. They are trying to figure out where they fit and negotiating all the largely unspoken rules that exist in a teenage world. Where I want to start with is having a look at what we know about brain development. So Professor Michael Nagel from Sunshine Coast University does a number of presentations on teenage brains, and he particularly has focused on sessions on female brains. And so as the slide suggests there, the brain studies are telling us that teenagers are reacting mostly on emotion and not in that logical, rational decision-making part. There's no surprises there for us. We don't need to, but sometimes we do need to be reminded of this. Sometimes we need to remember that so much of how they see the world goes through that emotional framework. As you can see there, the difference between young adults and adolescents even is markedly different, and we know that the brain isn't fully matured until about 24, research is saying. So we need to remember as parents and adults that our brains are at a very different place, and we think so differently to where teenagers are. If we think about brain development, we know that the brain really changes at puberty, and we also know that that's significant with hormones changing in their body. Obviously from the next slide you can see that hormones also play a role, and we know that brain development happens at puberty, and so not only is the brain changing but also the level of hormones in our daughters' bodies. And as you can see there from the female version is that estrogen is certainly lowering their aggression and competition and self-assertion and self-reliance, and that is obviously causing lots of changes for them and how they see themselves and how they see themselves in terms of academics too. When we think about processing emotions, you will know very well that girls are processing those emotions, but in comparison to male brains, studies are saying that they process the emotions through more senses, more so than a male does. They also verbalise that, and more thoroughly, I guess, and they verbalise that emotion quite quickly, and so that's probably where we see a lot of the verbal emotional outbursts. Also on emotions is that we see that from studies that emotions are being activated in both hemispheres of female brains, whereas it tends to be more in the right hemisphere of the male brain. And obviously these are extremes, and you know that there are variations for everyone, but certainly this is what the research is presenting. The question is it a better brain, the female brain? Yes, it matures and develops sooner pardon me, than a male brain. It's less likely to be hindered by some sort of learning disorder, which comes from statistics, and it engages with and utilises language, and we would all know that from mostly girls talking far more younger and far more frequently than boys at a younger age. And certainly it uses more areas for learning functions. That doesn't mean that everything's right with the world, unfortunately, and so we need to keep in mind the emotion they're processing. So there is obviously the things we talk about that are very girl things. Obviously girls are very socially interested and relax with others and fairly low stress levels. They have different chemicals, or the same chemicals but different variations in their brain. But we also do see the negatives, which is increased in irritability, the high stress levels, and the brain fog. And that's something that Libby Farmer often talks about at our at orientation days, about teenage brains almost going back to toddler years and needing to be told what to do again and being very nervous about getting it all right. So how do we see this play out? Obviously you can see from the screen there are a number of issues that girls deal with, and so emotional intelligence is really important, and that's something we obviously talk about at school, but something that you can work with your daughters, and I'll talk about some strategies with that later. We also see this through how they deal with their emotions, relationships, and stress. So are there positives? Yes, absolutely. As listed on the side, there are lots of positives, but then there are also some negatives that we also see. And look, they are across the ages. We've dealt with those very same things. And not all girls fit these profiles exactly, obviously, just like not all boys fit the same profiles that we talk about with boys and adolescents. But we do need to keep these in mind, I guess, when we get frustrated and want to react rather than be proactive about how we can help them navigate. Also, this last slide here talks about the changes for our teenagers, and I'll talk about that more later, that they're living in a world very, very different to anything that we experienced, or much of what we experienced. Okay, so some issues that we're all dealing with. Obviously, we've just talked about the brain development, and as it says, we think that young teenage girls often think that they're ready for anything by the start of teenage years, but they're obviously not. Also, we see lots of emotional responses, which we know already from their brain development, and we know from experience that they don't always automatically get to that logical, rational responses like we do, and so there's a lot of irritability. We also know that language is different for girls and boys, and so we tend to see more words. You know, they say on average women say 21,000 words a day and men say 7,000 words a day. We see girls expressing that more, but we don't always necessarily see that in the teenage years. As this next slide alludes to, look, we could say this with boys and girls, they all have attitude. Not all teenagers do all of the time, but certainly they have attitude, and that stems down to a number of issues. They think their life is much harder than ours. They don't think we understand or can relate, but that doesn't mean we don't stop trying. Also, part of it is there's an element that says teenagers have attitude because that's what teenagers are meant to be like. Another part of it is that they can get away with it because we love them and we don't reject them in ways that maybe their peers do, and so that doesn't change, that they're less likely to change their behaviour. And part of it is that secondary behaviour, that stuff we see in schools and deal with as teachers all the time, that they're angry and upset and frustrated or disappointed or scared or rejected, but they show that through their behaviour, and we deal with the secondary stuff, the emotional outbursts and the anger and the defiance or whatever, yet we actually need to work out what's the primary behaviour causing that, what's the thing that we can deal with, or what's the issue that we can deal with to actually change that behaviour. Image and friends is everything. Whether they tell you or not, they are obsessed with their body and they are obsessed with their image. They are constantly comparing themselves to others. Rosalind Wiseman, who wrote Queen Bees and Wannabes, talks about the fact that some groups even have markers, some things that make them, girl groups that make them distinctly exclusive to others. Certainly their words and actions indicate that their friends are going to be far more important than we do. As adults, does that mean we're not important? Absolutely not, but who they feel connected to and where their sense of belonging is certainly based around their friends. As alluded to earlier, their world is nothing like ours. They are digital natives. They're born into a world of an umpteen devices, social networking, and look, are they really spending 8.5 hours each day on technology? Research says that, but some of us would feel that they're on technology much more than that. Also, they're exposed to a world where media has been really highly sexualised, so is advertising and music, and so girls have become really desensitised to that material. And as Maggie Hamilton talks about in her book, girls are desensitised to these sexualised images and think that certain behaviours, clothing, words are normal, so to speak. Another issue that we're dealing with is technology, and technology can often be seen by parents as negative. Yet there are many, many positives with technology, using technology. So our students are using devices at school and at home, and which enables them to research really and be accessible to a whole range of resources across the internet. They can obviously use a wide range of programs and apps to create just so many different things. And I guess that, and they can share that online, they can share that within a school context or in a wider context. But we often deal with, I guess, the negatives. So we deal with the negative fallout of either cyberbullying or identity theft or inappropriate disclosure through photos or words. And so we see those negative effects and perceive that technology is the problem, when I think that that's not necessarily very helpful, certainly for teenagers. The other thing we get concerned about is the disconnection from our families if they're on the screens too much, or the possibility that they're connecting with a whole range of people that we don't know, or that they are living in some sort of fantasy world, so to speak, so a world that is not like their own, where they've created an online identity that doesn't represent who they are and leaves them open to a whole range of interactions that you're not aware of. And also, obviously, that it can change their perception of reality, a perception of what's real for them. So I guess an issue we all deal with is monitoring the cyber world, and it's really a tough battle. And we would always say that generally banning anything is problematic, because if you were to ban whatever social media platform your child was using, we often find that students will just create that another account and not be as easily accessible to you. So, or that if you ban them from certain devices, they will access the internet in another way, or umpteen different ways, and so that's not always necessarily helpful. We need to think about what we stand for as a family and what you want for your child, but I guess the issue about banning is that so much of connection takes place on social media, and that connection is 24 hours a day, and that's very different to a world that we grew up in. And so we can't expect them to live in the same world that we did, or with the same rules that we had. Certainly there are some strategies later about how you might monitor that and how you might put boundaries about that. I guess the perception about not banning is the fact that we say the best filter is the one between their ears. And yes, you can put filtering devices in, and yes, you can put restrictions yourself, but obviously we want them to be equipped to make the best decisions they can for themselves and for those people around them, and so that's what's really important, to have that conversation. So here are some strategies. Firstly, we say this often as parents: no, you're not alone. You're not the only person struggling. You're not the only person who doesn't let them go to a party. You're not the only person who denies them something. And I often say you might not always love your child. You'll always love your child, but you may not always like them. So we often suggest that you should try and get in contact with your child's friend's parents, and that might make the battle that it feels like sometimes easier. Also focus on the primary issue, not the secondary behaviour. It's really easy for me to say and hard to do. So rather than the outward displays of emotion and the outbursts we see or the reactions we see, figure out what's behind that. This third one is to focus on what's good and really affirm what's right with your daughter. It's very easy to point out what's wrong all the time, but to point out what their strengths are in a situation, or what they're doing well in a situation, or catch them all those times that they're doing well. And also respect her values and feelings. It's very easy as adults, when we lead a stressful life with work and responsibilities, and we see that the life of a teenager is so much easier, to automatically dismiss a lot of their feelings or the things that are happening in their life, when that's not obviously going to be helpful to them, and therefore that creates a situation where they feel they're not respected or they're not listened to, and that creates a divide. In terms of strategies, we need to think about boundaries. So what do we think is acceptable boundaries? And we find that it's much better for teenagers to have boundaries to push against than to have no boundaries at all. So you have to work out what those boundaries are in life. So Michael Carr-Gregg talks about him having some non-negotiables. So he doesn't fight about their bedrooms, but he does fight about sleep, for instance. So he's a well-known psychologist, and he fights about their access in the cyber world, but he doesn't he doesn't fight about their bedrooms being untidy, for instance. So that's a purely personal decision about what you want to consider. One of the things that we find really interesting is that sometimes they want you to say no, and you don't understand why, that they might ask you to go to a party, and sometimes they actually want you to say no, that's not okay, because it gives them an out, and we become the bad guys and they're still the good guys, because they get to say, I can't come to this party, or I can't do that because my parents won't let me. And even sometimes they go so far as to really object against that, but at times we have heard from students that they were glad that their parents made that decision on their behalf. So I'm going to suggest some boundaries, but one of the things is to see if they can negotiate what they think's acceptable and in line with what you want as a family, or in line with what you want for them. So some examples that we've talked about is you might want to set some time limits. Now I've said there, for internet use, for instance, an hour or 2 hours a day. Now that's not going to necessarily be for homework, but you might say, well, you're allowed an hour or 2 hours on social media, or you're allowed an hour or 2 hours on Netflix, or you're allowed of whatever it might be. And so some people talk about giving their children a timer, so they can decide whether they use it first when they get home, maybe just before they go to bed, or maybe use it all in one go. But if they go over the time, then some people talk about using that timer the next day and starting again and saying, well, you went over yesterday and so you've lost that today. Certainly some dedicated family time, so you might say, okay, Sundays or dinner time, we're at the table, there's no devices, we're together as a family, or whatever, just opportunities to engage, or that once a week you go out for a dinner or coffee or some sort of catch up, whether it's mum or dad, or with siblings or without siblings, that's your set time. Another idea is to have a time that is needed for notice to negotiate. So some parents talk about the pressure to be put on the spot to decide now whether your child can go to a party or a sleepover, and they have to have an answer while the child's on the phone right at that moment, and the parent doesn't know all the information, and it becomes really quite problematic. So some parents say, well, I won't negotiate when you're on the phone to someone else, or I need 24 hours of notice before you agree to a sleepover or you go to a party, and that enables you to have a conversation, to find out some information if you need, and make those choices, rather than making a decision on the spot and then changing it, and that changing your mind and that causing a problem, or rather than making a decision on the spot and then it being something that you're uncomfortable with. Obviously set age-appropriate rules about social networking sites, whatever that may be. Obviously Facebook's old, Instagram's probably more the place to be, or whatever social networking place, you might want to make some regulations about that. So you might say that you want to know, at a young age, lots of parents say they want to know their kids' passwords, or they want to know everyone who's on there, or maybe they want to be on there themselves. So you need to make some choices about that. Certainly some boundaries around what do they share of other people, what happens if they do share something and it goes wrong, what do they do? Lots of parents talk about having a time in the day and a place where all devices are off and charged. So at the end of the night, say, or a certain time at night, all devices are at the charging point, so it stops children from being on the internet all night or being woken up by notifications or staying up when you're unhappy about that. Another strategy is to learn about the girl world. So we've got lots of books in the parent library, and I'm going to talk about some of the girl world that Rosalind Wiseman talks about in Queen Bees and Wannabes. And what you might read now might not be appropriate. And I know that there's times when Libby's talked at orientation day and some parents go, I've never experienced that. And then a year later, they see what she's talking about. And so, there's opportunities to reread those books too. And reflect on one of the things that we also often talk about is reflect on our own experience, so what were our own teenage years like, and then how that affects how we perceive things and how we perceive our daughter or we perceive our daughter's friends. And if sometimes we probably have to deal with some of our own stuff to be able to best react with our daughters. The sixth strategy is to communicate with your daughter and get to know her friends. In the book Raising Confident and Courageous Daughters, Joanne Deek says, your daughter may not appear to listening, but she in fact is. She may pretend she's not listening to a word you're saying, but keep talking because she often is. Or alternatively, reflect about how you communicate. So there's a few issues. So sometimes people, with boys particularly, you talk about not having eye contact and not sitting opposite them, walking and talking with them. With girls, sometimes they want that, sometimes not. So getting them in the car and driving them somewhere, or going and saying we need to go and have coffee or dinner or a milkshake or whatever it be, or some treat, but get her talking. The whole concept about knowing her friends is get in the car and have her and her friends in the car. Often you'll hear lots and lots of information because it's like they've forgotten that you're there. Certainly, we need to think about when we are talking, are we just trying to find the answers to the questions that we have? We need to sometimes be really conscious of our agenda and think and just listen to what's really being said, and not jump so quickly to solutions, or not jump so quickly to what we think they need to do, but try and question and challenge them to get to the point that they can make the decision for themselves. And that just next slide there continues with that. Really, really listen. We're really quick to give advice and identify solutions, but sometimes they just want their feelings acknowledged and listened to. Also think about how you might guide her. So you might, as I suggested before, create opportunities to go out and do things, and really be conscious. They're going to ask for your time at dinner time, or when you're ready to go to bed and you're exhausted and you've got a big day at work the next day, and you just want to go to sleep, and they ask you to talk at that time, or they ask you to talk at dinner. Sometimes you have to get them right at that moment, and that's the time that they're going to talk. And remember that they're going to be reacting with emotion, and temper that. Certainly, we often advise communicating with other parents in the school, so getting to know other parents, getting to know what their standards are and their rules are, and knowing whether where they're going and what they're doing, and ringing them and saying, are they really coming to your place, or are they really leaving from your house and going to Chermside or the city? Are you dropping them off? Well, I'll pick them up. That kind of thing. And also, please contact the school. Ask the year level coordinator, ask the pastoral care teacher, ask for your daughter's teachers to find out. Number 8 is think about emotional intelligence. So that's the ability to know and regulate your own emotions, and to recognise the emotion of others and respond accordingly. And be really explicit about that. We do that with young children. We teach them when to say hello and say goodbye and to thank people. And sometimes, teenagers need reminding of that, or sometimes teenagers need reminding of, well, when you're in that situation, maybe it's best not to give your opinion, or maybe it's best to be conscious of how that person's feeling, or you might be really excited about this, but your friend's really quite sad about this, and so you need to react. Or you feel really sad about this, but you need to also remember that your friend's just got a new boyfriend, or just going on a holiday and they're really excited and they might not be conscious. That doesn't mean that they're not a good friend. That doesn't mean that they're not, they don't care about you, that they stop caring about you, but they're just in that situation. So I guess it's about giving perspective. Number 9 is about modelling behaviour, so teaching them by example, so about how they handle the ups and downs of being with friends. The stronger a girl's identity, the less likely she is to be pushed around, so really empower her as a girl as to what does she stand for, what does she believe, who does she want to be, challenge them on that. Certainly how we deal with situations models to them how they deal with situations, and certainly how dads play a significant role in how their daughters know to be treated. And so that's really important for dads to step up and show that too. Number 10, offer realistic strategies rather than solving the problem. So rather than saying this is what you need to do and this is what you should do, where they might obviously not want to make that choice, is ask questions and offer some possible strategies that they can do and let them decide what they think is best to do. And sometimes you have to make that decision to intervene or to not. There are times to intervene, but there's obviously times to let her go the way. Certainly as she gets older, she'll want to make those choices herself. So it's a really ongoing process over teenage girls' years to be helping her along the way there. So conversations is important, and it's about giving them lines and responses that they can use in tricky situations. So whether they get into a car with a drunk driver, or whether they are offered some sort of substance, or whether they're at a party and they don't feel comfortable and they want to go home, or maybe they're feeling unsafe. So for instance, through the RSEQ docudrama, one of the strategies is to say that if you're in a car with a drunk driver, then you should say that you think you're going to vomit, because no one wants vomit in their car, and so they'll often stop. And so that gives them an out. If they're in an unsafe situation or they're unhappy, what might they do to get out of that? Even in advance, what can they do to make sure they don't get in that situation? But if they're in a situation where they're on their own or they want to get away, what are the lines that they could, or the responses they could use? One of the things we often talk to parents about is the need to say to your child, okay, if you want out, you need to text me, or I'm going to ring you at this time. So you either text me and tell me you want home, and then what I'll do is I'll ring you back. And then they answer the phone, and their whole thing in front of their friends is, I don't want to go, I can't believe you're making me go home. And again, we look like the bad guys, and they look like they're opting out of a situation where they don't necessarily feel okay. Or it might be that you ring them and you check, and you ask questions and they answer yes or no, and you have a sense of whether you think they're safe or not, or whether they're happy or not, and they can get out of a situation. Number 12 is about creating downtimes, and it's just about getting them away from all the pressures and stresses and getting them to just enjoy life a bit. Number 13 is thinking about an alternative person, like some sort of ally or mentor, and so that could be an aunt, a family friend, a cousin, someone generally a female, generally a little bit older, or it could be a lot older, but someone who's not family, who they might feel safe and secure to go and speak to, that's not a parent, and they don't feel like they're going to be held to account like a parent would. And it's obviously better if you know that person well, and you know that person would tell you anything if it was needed, and that you know that person would give them some sound advice. That's always a good idea. Number 14 is about helping your daughter to develop a strong sense of self, and I've talked about that earlier, that if girls know who they are and what they stand for, and their basic rights, things that they deserve, and for respect for themselves, and the right to be safe and the right to be treated fairly, and that kind of, and their responsibilities, they're more likely to be able to articulate what is right and wrong in their world, or what they want to do or not do. Okay, the next section is about understanding girl world. So Rosalind Wiseman in Queen Bees and Wannabes talks about girls' friendships are some of the most intense relationships of their lives, and your daughter's friendships with other girls is like a double-edged sword. They're the key to surviving adolescence, yet they can be the biggest threat to her survival as well. Your daughter is often too close to see the good or bad influence of her friends, So that's where she needs your guidance. What I'm going to talk about is some terms that Rosalind Wiseman uses, and my warning there is to not necessarily use those terms, and not use terms like cliques, because girls don't like to think that they're a part of a clique, and that they'll be quite defensive about that. They can be really quite confrontational if you label her friends, particularly if they see her friends, she sees her friends in a positive way and you don't. So you make some choices about how you use these words. So queen bees are obviously, we hear this term often, but Rosalind Wiseman talks about the fact that their popularity is based on fear and control. She reigns supreme, she weakens friendships between other girls so she can gain more power. Her friends, people do what she wants, she doesn't appear to be intimidated. She's very persuasive to her friends, but she'll come across to adults often as the parents as quite charming. Queen Bee's power comes from her sidekick. So her sidekick is the person who helps her, and they will focus, that sidekick will do the work of the Queen Bee. And the interesting difference she talks about is the sidekick will change her behaviour when separate from the Queen Bee, but the Queen Bee won't. If the sidekick decides that she doesn't want to be like that anymore, then certainly the Queen Bee is probably likely to get another person to be her sidekick. The banker is a really interesting person because often she's really in the know and seems really friendly and that everyone knows everything. She's the one who knows everything and everyone confides in her. But in actual fact, that can be a negative. There can be a negative aspect of that, in that information that she has is her currency or her power, and she gains and dispenses the information because she's in the know. She claims that she's getting it as a friend, but often it becomes a point of gossip. Rosalind Wiseman describes her as often cute and harmless, goes under the adult radars, withdrawn and secret in front of adults. The banker to the other girls is one of those people that can seem harmless, but is also someone to be afraid of because she's got all that information. If she is found out, she won't be trusted, and so that's a really precarious role she plays too, because she wants to get that information to keep her power, but if she uses that information against the wrong girl, then that's probably problematic for her. The torn bystander is obviously the girl who stands by and is torn between doing what's right and wrong. She knows that she wants to be part of that group. She knows that that's where her friends are. You might debate the quality of her friends, but they're certainly her friends. But she will be quite torn. She might apologise to the Queen Bee or justify the Queen Bee's behaviour, yet she is really torn because, so she doesn't want to apologise, but she knows in her heart that maybe she should. Sometimes torn bystanders are the people who dumb themselves down, so to speak, so that they don't look like they're smart, so that other people will like them, which is very sad. And the next one is the pleaser, the wannabe, or the messenger. These girls are desperately trying to get into the group, and obviously girls can play in a group. There can be a multiple number of torn bystanders, a multiple number of sidekicks, and a multiple bankers. You know, it's not like there's this 5 or 6 people just in a group. These girls want, the pleaser and wannabe or messenger want to get into the group and do anything that they can. Yet the difficulty with girl worlds is actions must be effortless, because if they're accused of trying too hard, that's seen to be really bad too. Messengers are about people going between girls to try and improve her status, and so it's about trying to gain power and get and maintain that power. The targets are people who are often excluded or humiliated or made fun of. While most targets are outside of the group, certainly a girl in a group can certainly become a target quite easily, and that creates a whole world of pain for that girl and for you if that's your daughter. The last one's a floater, and I often talk about maybe that's the place to be, but that's not always what girls want. That girl can be friends with a whole range of different groups, because the problem is when one girl's so heavily invested in one group, if things go wrong with one girl in that group or with a couple of people in that group, it's like their world falls apart. Whereas if girls have friends across the grade, across subjects, across groups, then it makes it much easier when there's conflict. We probably see it less at this school, or certainly I have. I've worked in a girls' school with over 100 girls per grade. I would have seen that more frequently than certainly here when we've got such a smaller group of girls, and it's much harder for that, group, the cool group, so to speak, with these roles to really come out. Look, to finish up, I guess you need to understand that not every girl's going to fit into those roles. Your daughter's not going to be like that. She could be. She might be in a role and you not even be aware of that. If you feel your daughter is and you're struggling to understand that, I guess the key point is to start the conversation. Keep it going, keep listening, challenging her, asking her questions to make her think about the situation she's in. Also, remember what you've learnt in terms of, or what you know in terms of the power and how you need to approach that. Seek help from professionals, talk to other parents, talk to the school. Certainly, as I said, Rosalind Wiseman's books are there in our parent library and another library. And finally, these are the resources that I've taken my notes from for this talk. There are lots of other girls' books out there that you can read, and I'm also free to talk to you at any stage and can be contacted at the college. Thank you.